Hello, everybody.
Hello everyone.
Hello, people. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for joining us.
Okay, I'm going to shout out to Xingyue, John, Wendy, Shiva, Ryan, Cody, Gyokchua, and
Rongshen.
Renshen.
And Ryan.
Karen's is here as well. And
Okay.
Alrighty, people. And really happy to see you all here. We will start on time. I know people usually come in, after that they'll keep admitting, people will just keep coming and then we'll just admit them.
Yep.
Really thank you for coming. And, if you want, you can put on your faces. We'll just, say hello. And for those who still, coming in, welcome to everyone. Welcome all of you here.
Yep.
Again, in case people don't know, I am Spang, right? And then, hello. Give a shout out to myself.
Wow.
And this is Lei. Hello, I'm Lei. Yeah. And then together, obviously, we are Spang and Lei.
Apparently.
Yeah. So we're the host for today.
Yes.
And obviously, as host, we would like to say shout out to our guest speaker today.
Yes.
Debbie Ding.
Debbie Ding. Yay.
And then, thank you so much, Debbie, for coming, sharing with us, today's session. First things first, let me introduce Debbie and her research assistant, Bino South.
Yes.
So yeah, she's really tired from having her
research on water.
her research on water today.
Yeah,
earlier this morning.
Yes.
And firstly, let me introduce Debbie. Debbie is a really she's a really close friend in a sense. I find her quite kindred spirit, in terms of research and all that. And we've always Spang and Lei has always admired Debbie's work, right? She actually has very interesting investigative directions as an artist.
Yes.
She's interested in obviously alternatives and fictional theories of knowledge.
Yep.
And certainly the questions, correct me if I'm wrong, Debbie, later, but certainly the questions that she asks are pertinent questions, especially now what's happening on the net, what's happening online, when we can have big figures, prominent figures and leaders saying this is real and this is not real. And why do we say it? Because I declare so. So that is interesting. And as artists, sometimes we wonder, as the internet, is a place for us to connect, as those of us, we were talking about, War doing it with others, we're talking about it this morning. And well, Debbie is one of the artists that I would like to introduce, actually talk about this prototyping and all that.
So I think part of why we wanted Debbie to join us today is also the way she does her investigation to the idea of prototyping. The making of things, the reiteration of things, making with your hands while trying to figure out what exactly you want to say. I think that part is something that we really admire about Debbie in terms of the investigative method. Yeah.
I think in Singapore we still have a definition of what artists are, or people that we consider, the kind of artists, working with a fine art, like paint, material, granite, whatever, as artists usually. But Debbie is a different kind of artist,
She does programming.
She does
3D printing.
Yeah, a lot of iterations
she
and
writes a
reiteration,
lot.
writing as well as part of her
And Debbie has
investigation.
this wonderful blog where she blogs everything that she learned
Yep.
about
Theories of knowledge.
from theory to using softwares.
So
without
that,
further ado,
yes, I will hand over to Debbie Ding and Bino Dorothy Ding Sao, Mimi.
yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Spang and Lei, for inviting me to speak today and to share with you all about my work. I'm going to share my screen with you in a second to switch to this. And what I was going to talk about today is, well, it's funny because a few years ago I forgot that I named my talk Fiction of Knowledge, but I realized I always come back to this idea of this fiction of knowledge, and this is actually what I do. It's very hard to explain what I do sometimes. To give you a bit of backstory is that I did my degree in literature, and I also worked as a copywriter in the beginning, but I was really interested in other things. I was interested in history, geography. I also was interested in design. I wanted to do design work, and I just decided to do it on the side, and then it became the thing I did in the end as well. So I did commercial design, and I also did my master's in a design-related field. It was supposed to be in design interactions, but of course it was a bit more like speculative design. So in a way, I have a lot of interest, and sometimes I don't know where all these interests go to. I make a lot of things, and then some of the things I've made sort of ended up being exhibited in the kind of the realm of art. But of course, I guess the core of it is that I was interested in a lot of areas. I wanted to look at all these things in my work. I always put them in my own website, in dbbd.sg. I think in the very beginning, I was interested in mapping and archiving and collecting things. It's a very basic thing that people, like. I collected a lot of things. I presented things in a format at that point, like I wrote a lecture. I sort of delivered this performance lecture at the substation. Let me move this bar at the bottom to the top instead. How do I move this bar? I don't know, I go this way. So yeah, and I also collected spots. These are these things you always see around the city. I think I was working in advertising at the time, and I worked in an agency that where they had 2 buildings, and every day I walked through the CBD, and I started making this game to like collect these spots for fun in the beginning. But after a while, I had like 600 of them. And I was interested in what they meant as well, what these things meant, and trying to investigate. Was there a dictionary? Was there a reason for what these symbols meant? Collecting dates and roads. So when I did a project in Paris, I realized that they stamp the dates when they do the road construction. So I also collected these things along the way. Collecting maps, also collecting kind of floor plans. This was a project I did in Seoul with a Korean artist, because you always talk about flats. Like I live in a 3-room flat in Singapore, and HDBs have quite fixed floor plans, and in Korea, they have the same thing, public housing that has also very fixed apartment layouts that someone said this is how much space you need as a family of a certain size. So a lot of maps, collecting things, collecting rocks. I was trading rocks with people. These rocks were meant to be a collection of Singapore rocks, but of course, it wasn't like a rock collection you have elsewhere, maybe in other countries where you collect rocks that have like they're geological rocks. But here, a lot of the rocks were urban rocks, rocks that were man-made. And creating rocks, making these small collections of alternative archives of places and spaces that were important to me. This is another collection of maps printed in 3D form. Let me just go through it. I also collected my dreams in the form of maps. So this is like 100 of my dreams in map form. I thought it was easier to collect them using a visual format to show them. I wonder if my label is hidden there. Okay. So I'm talking about all these collecting. I think one of the challenges is translating all this research and material into a visual form. It's funny because for me, a lot of my work began as a piece of writing before I translate it. Perhaps because I know my background was first in literature, so I always end up writing and then trying to figure out what form the work will take. But I guess it also starts from very basic questions sometimes. A lot of the works I'm going to talk about today are these some of the works that I've done over the last 10 years. And for me, as a person, I like walking, I guess, I like to walk on the ground. I like to, when I lived in London, I walked a lot more, and now the baby's a bit hard to walk, but I also like to see from a different viewpoint, from the very top of things. So if I have the time, I travel to a new place, I like to be on the top of things, on top of buildings, like this, seeing it from the top view. And I often start my talks with this selfie, Mars selfie, because I think I always think it's an interesting image that when humanity gets to the furthest point that it's ever traveled, they take this like selfie of the Mars. This is the Mars selfie by the Curiosity rover, and it's sort of taking a selfie of itself of what it sees at the very edge of where man has traveled. Another interesting image of the view from a reconnaissance plane, and from here you can almost see the sort of curvature of the earth, and there was this thing that they talk about, the overview effect, where when people see the earth hanging in the balance, in the sky, in the void, some people have the reaction that, well, the earth is something that actually we really need to protect. But of course, there's also another view that, this is actually all material to be sort of harvested. And some years ago, I went to a conference where there was this was a design conference, and there was this cake on display there by a designer, Yona Gaynor, and the work was actually about this leaving Earth celebration cake. So she imagined that there'd be this scenario where man would decide that instead what they would use the whole of Earth, right, is to carve it up and use all the material on Earth, cut up the entire Earth to produce all these kind of satellites that can be used to bring mankind to new frontiers, to colonize new planets, and to harvest more material from all of the universe, flying away from Earth itself, having this effectively destroyed it and used it to build all these ships, and satellites that would bring us to new places. So this cake was there, and it was a cake at this design conference, and so it had sat there for maybe 3 or 4 days. It was starting to be a bit uncake-like, actually, because the cake was there and just sitting in the room for like 4 days already. And sometimes the thing about the form of something is something that I think about a lot. When I was a kid, I used to ask people what they thought a scallop was, and ask them to draw it, because this was something that would often yield very different results. Because most of the people in Singapore think a scallop looks like a cake form, like that, like cake. I used to realize, because one year I was trying to ask somebody to get me a scallop edge tablecloth. This is the one from IKEA. Is a product from IKEA. So I said, I want a scallop edge tablecloth, but they were like, but the scallop is a cake, But of course, what I realized is that I was thinking of this scallop edge, and until I asked people what exactly they thought scallops or scallop edge was, I realized that not everybody had the same idea of what a thing is, what form a thing is even. So it starts maybe from a very simple question like that. This was a brand logo for Your Singapore some years ago. 10 years ago, it was the brand logo, and it was kind of a funny logo to have, because I realized that if people have never been to Singapore, they would never know that this accumulation of squares, randomly placed squares, was actually related to this form of the island. If they've never come here, how would they know? How they know this? Yeah. I also imagine Singapore a bit like this black hole, of meaning, where you're just stuffing these things into it, and I think this is a picture. I think maybe one of the pictures that started it all. I spent a lot of time walking up and down the Singapore River, using it as a point to find places as well. And it occurred to me that there was actually this signboard by the river that was not really, how do you say, it was always empty, and it was often stuffed with rubbish. And then people would, someone would come and clear the rubbish away, but then, passerbys would stuff new rubbish in, and it had no explanation about the Singapore River or the place we were in, and I found that Singapore River is a place where it's quite short, its name is Singapore River, which doesn't really tell you where it is in Singapore. And other countries, when we talk about rivers, what the river is even the River Thames, people know, they have a picture of it in their head. They know where they stand in relation to it. But if you ask people here, I realized people didn't know what Singapore River was. Is it, where is it? What is it, So, I asked people what they thought the river looked like and collected the sketches of it. So the sketches that came back were all quite different. The things that they noticed were very different. So these are some of the sketches people made that I translated into a map form. There are things that don't even look, that looks like a lake, looks like a lake instead. And or things that they thought the reservoirs connected together, which they do not. But kind of a so I wanted to collect these stories. I made this giant map of the Singapore River, on which I asked people to contribute their stories, whether they were real or not real. I would collect them, So, because I felt like a lot of times, when you remember something, it's not like you could say this is definitely real. It's like a thing. There is a when you write it down, or so when you translate it down to text, sometimes the story is changed. Maybe if you write it next year, or even next month, or the next day, the story has changed actually. So it's hard to say it's a real story. So I wanted it to be free for people to, pen down things that even they weren't real, or they were outright lies. They could write it down and I would archive it. So this was the map that I had. I exhibited it at the substation as part of their open call. So they were really supportive of the work at the time, and it was also shown at other places like Singapore Art Museum. also showed it at National Museum as well in a different format. Some of the stories that came back were quite hilarious. People contributed things like LKY's Arc, which obviously refers to this one. And also a few people have written about this UFO, which if you have been in town, you recognize this UFO. One of the stories I received was a story about 14th century potshots in Pulau Saigon. At that point, I didn't really know what is Pulau Saigon actually. But what happened is that because I'd been building this work, another work, interactive touch table with the map of Singapore that changed, depending on how you touched it, it would change according to the map over time. So the map of the Singapore River has changed already in reality. So it was just making it visual. And I was given a opportunity to show it at the Art Science Museum. At that point, there was also an exhibit next to my work of a cabinet of items from Pulau Saigon, which I was like, I didn't know anything about this island in this island. And actually this thing is actually here in the maps. In 1819, there is this islet, a small island in the river, which doesn't seem to be, has been subsumed back into the land since then. And that sort of that encounter sort of led to me making this project over the next few years, the Library of Pulau Saigon, which you see here in the map. This is actually Pulau Saigon, the island on the map. And it's funny because it was there in the maps all the while, and then suddenly around 75, it's not really there anymore. You know, it starts to be, you know, everything's just been filled up. But yet, when you read about it, when you try to find out more about it, it was very hard to research about this island because there was only there wasn't very much information that could be found. There was a study that someone had done on it, but it was also mainly a lot of it was also about how it was so difficult to find any oral history report about it. Even though the island, you know, that had a railway station on it, it had an abattoir, it had warehouses, it had things on it, and it would seem really strange that a place has disappeared from kind of public memory within our generation. My parents don't know what is Pulau Saigon, I think, even, and a lot of people I talked to, even older people, don't know anything about this island. So I ended up finding out that there was this archaeological dig that had been done at the island at the point. That's the potshots that was referred to in the card story that was contributed at my work, a real story as it turns out. And I actually traced it back to Mr. Koh Lian Wat and Jennifer Barry, who were the archaeologists, amateur archaeologists, and the archaeologist who was working with NUS at that point. And they had been digging up the site of Pulau Saigon back then and looking at the items there. And I think the site for me was quite interesting because when I read this, it was a post-18th century archaeological assemblage, you know, which is actually quite recent if you think about it, you know, so it's actually quite recent. And it was also a very topsy-turvy site where things at the bottom were actually the new things. I think it's on top. So it's normally you get the old stuff at the bottom, right? But in this case, the site had been dredged so many times that the old stuff was all on the top and the new stuff was at the bottom, and it was full of these very mundane items also on this list that have been like recorded in this dig, you know. The items in it were that were recorded. This is actually a picture of the lab itself where they actually had the things from NUS. Where they stored it. It had some broken porcelain in it, and they also had a list of items that for me sounded very quotidian, very mundane, like you know, maybe a school child walked past and whoops, they dropped something in, you know, and now it's recorded as an archaeological item, you know, item in an archaeological dig. Small modern kind of mass-made items, you know, were also in it. And it was this mundaneness, almost boringness. It was so boring. Maybe it was because it was so boring, you know. When you see this kind of thing, and when I saw the cabinet of the items from Pulau Saigon, the real things next to my work, I was really perplexed because they were so tiny. They were so almost insignificant in the vastness of that museum space. You know, and you know, Art Science, they had like this Titanic show. It was like, you know, supposed to be super epic, and then Singapore history is just like this tiny little item down there, you know, so tiny, and in my memory, there was an item that was a label. Maybe I feel I don't think I remember it right, but basically I thought there was an item that was basically a label, and it was label. I was so confused. The items were so small and so confusing. What was I looking at? It was like rusted kind of bits, you know. And it's funny because when I was thinking about this later on, when I saw Mr. Koh Lian Wat, who was the amateur archaeologist who worked on it, he had a passion for it in a way unlike any other. I mean, these were some of the sketches he made of things, and I do not know what they are. He doesn't know what they were, but he would look at them. He would just turn them around. He did sketches of them in different angles, trying to figure out what they are, what exactly they are. Thinking about what is this thing, what could the thing be, trying to figure out for himself as well. He was very interested in Neolithic wares, actually. So although I wanted to find out what the things were, I realized I could never get it back. No one could tell me what they were. Even the archaeologists were like, it's not my role there. My role as an archaeologist is not to imagine what could it be and guess what it is. It's not that. It's not to make it up, So I wondered if I could actually translate them into objects, just from the names themselves, to sort of think of it as if I could find a machine way to translate it over. What if I only had the name and I could unforget the object? I can't really remember the object, so I can only say it's like a unforgetting. I can only unforget the thing a bit, So if we had the names for it, could we use something a bit like, like we see on if you see on Google, a lot of these things, thinking about how we use neural networks to actually classify or to detect objects, to determine what's the object, what is from all these photos that we have of things. Google Images is another example of that accessible deep learning model. When you don't know what a scallop is, you can Google it, Google image it, and say, oh, that's what a scallop is. Now no one has to guess whether it is cake or something else. And I also think about how when we talk about a thing today, a thing looks like that, but maybe time is a factor, depending on what time, over the years, maybe a few years from now, things do not look the same. When we talk about phone, I saw a music video where the phone, used to be very chunky, and now it's like the smartphones are so different. Phones are all everything has changed also over time. So how can I make a process to sort of translate an object into from just its name to figure out what it is. What if we looked at all the pictures of an object that are related to its name that humans have actually, like, what is a monitor? What exactly is a monitor? Is it just this form? When you see this form, is that what it is? Can we interpolate the shape as well, the 3D form from it? It almost also begs the question of where exactly is the art happening? Is the machine the one that helps me produce it, or is it in the network? Of all this information, all this information that we've collected, from all places, a lot of things here also being on the comments or on different sources from people as well. Where exactly is the art actually happening? Is it me who made it, or is it from all this data? Like, for example, we search the search term asbestos, coming up with a way to produce iterative versions of the object. Iterative being that if I change one parameter, parametric means when I change one parameter, I produce a different version of it. So I wanted to almost like do this repeated studies of the objects to see what they could look like. And it's almost a bit like when I show you the pictures just now of Mr. Koh Lian Wat's sketches, turning it around, trying to sketch it to get at the heart what the thing means, by doing it over and over again. So these are some of the pictures of the objects that I produced in the end as this part of this library that people could touch these objects. This work is still on exhibit in NUS Museum at the moment as well. It's part of their permanent show, Radio Malaya. So I ended up printing things. They were things that you could touch, and they were like, people would respond to them like, what is this? It looks like a cornflake, or my dog's frisbee, But of course, they were things from the list of this archaeological dig, all the things were there. All the things I made 53 of them. And it was very fortunate. The first time I went to show it was at this archaeology library. I didn't know they were going to call it a library at the time. It was called the Shard Room at first. And then when I was going to show it, they renamed the thing to Archaeology Library. And it's a place where it had a lot of artifacts from Singapore. And I think one thing I love about it, or one thing I find funny about it, is when you go there, it's got all these things there, and actually when you come in, you see all this big pottery from China, from India, and they're all like massive, beautiful, pottery, ceramics. And then you come to the Singapore section, which is mainly a collection of shards, of lots and lots of shards. And for me, it's almost like but of course the beauty of it is also that someone's piecing to it's still a work in progress, where people are trying to piece together the things, kind of a living gallery almost, so I really like that space, and I always think of it as trying to piece together the bits of the mystery as well. So the work was actually almost like juxtaposed, where through this glass screen, where the real objects were here, and behind were the objects from the Library of Pulau Saigon that I had made, with these 53 objects here. And these are the objects that you can see here. Yeah, and today, and it's funny because after a while, a lot of the source of my images was from like Google Images, and eventually even the image of the things that I had made was making its way into the search, the source material for it as well, like this Chinese type spoon. Maybe I think it's a bit more time to talk about it. Okay, I'll talk about the other bits now. To go back to the Mars rover image, I think one thing I've always found interesting about this kind of imaging is you always see this black area, because that's actually as the limit of where the image was taken. Yeah. And you see it has this hard black line outside of it. But of course, it doesn't mean that the world ended down there. The world continues. But of course, in this case, this is all, they show you the maximum amount of pixels they've collected. And for me, I always imagine that the image, even when the image is ended, even like now in this screen, when I present it on my computer, it's the resolution of my slides doesn't match my screen because it's a bit older slide, and I have these black bars on the side, but of course the image, the thing doesn't end there. The viewer continues to imagine what the things are. It's something that I played with in some of my older works as well. I tried to play around this broken up edge thing as well in the works. But maybe I'll talk a bit about this hologram that I worked on in 2017. It was for artist residency with the Australian War Memorial. So they wanted an artist who was interested to work with World War II history, which is a kind of a weird event. It's an event that existed before even me or even my parents. My parents, they everything for us. I mean, even before Singapore existed, before as Singapore, World War II, it's almost an event before that. So when we talk about Singaporeans relating to World War II, it's like we were not even defined as Singaporeans then. So what is World War II? It's a event that we experienced as civilians mainly. It wasn't like other countries like Australia or or Britain that fought it like as part of, they were actually fighting it. But Singapore was like just caught in the middle, of it. So our experience of it is kind of I had this really ambivalent, maybe kind of feel to it, because I didn't know how exactly, and people's sort of recollection of it was so different. So how do I actually represent that? Kind of think about how to translate that into a work. Having access to the archives where people's records and memories of it was of an event, like a traumatic event, was so different. I wanted to find a visual medium that would sort of represent it. Maybe I'll explain how I ended up with holography. So you can see here that these are plates and they're not VR. So when I talk about holograms, I do mean a plate, this is pulse laser holography that was made in the optics lab. That when you have to see it from a certain angle, from certain angles, it can only be played back using light. So depending on where you stand, the image looks different. So it sort of represents almost like where if there is an event, depending on where the viewer is standing, they see a completely different angle of the same thing. So in this plate itself, you see, depending on where you stand, a different image. Yeah. And for that work, I ended up looking at a lot of different technologies of perception, looking into the archives for stereoscopes. These are the old kind of way, of viewing a 3D image, cardboard, this cardboard and a lens, This is an example of the magic lantern, the 19th century way of storing images in a room. The parallax barrier grid I saw. So I just tried to look around for a lot of things, did a survey of all these different modes of presentation. This is a lenticular print, which some of you have these like magic pictures, you may find them. This was the artwork I saw. There's also, this is actually using, so this is actually using a screen with a mirror below it to give the illusion that there is it's like a Pepper's ghost, what they call Pepper's ghost. So there were a lot of different things, and one of the things that captured me is this holography, actually holograms, like real, like holograms are this format that is kind of like always stuck in the past. When you think about it, it's like super 90s, you know, it's like super futuristic, but also nobody really makes art with holograms at all. It's like a thing that's stuck in the past and yet used in science centers a lot. Like this is on the top of Mount Stromlo, which is like the big Magellan telescope. So it's very futuristic. We always see it used in science, technology, future, national project, you know, but we don't see it used for art anymore. And I thought it was really strange as a format. You know, this was I don't know, wheat, the future of wheat exhibition. I don't know, you know, I saw, and it was like wheat. Okay, all right. So it made me very interested in this, and thinking of using it as a way of representing image as well.
Down on the right-hand side, obviously something's moved more than the minimum.
This hologram was commissioned by the Singapore military, and the intention was to show the role of the civilian soldier in Singapore. So they chose holography because it was able to offer them the ability to show from one side of the hologram you see the man in business clothes, and as you walk around it he changes to military uniform. So that's one way in which holography has a very powerful ability to convey messages.
In 1994, Asia's first billboard holograms in Singapore.
Council paying tribute to NS men through holograms. It's MINDEF's high-tech way of saluting our operationally ready national servicemen for their role in Singapore's defence.
Holograms of a national serviceman in his dual role as citizen and soldier will dot 5 MRT stations. The holograms were made in Australia using special lasers on holographic film. And the reaction?
It's very impressive, very good. Yeah, very special.
Yeah, so that was the so I saw that had been used also, you know. It was in fact this is a statement made by some of the manufacturers of holograms at the time. You know, they expected that we're seeing it everywhere in the world, the visual everywhere. And in fact, if you look in a lot of art courses in Europe, in the US, actually holography, there will be a holography department. You know how like now there are like courses where they be like photography, you can do your BA in photography. They also thought you're going to do it in holography, but it didn't happen.
MIT as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so all these places, they thought that holography was going to be the future of anything, and then it's not. Because well, as it turns out, it is very difficult to work with. It is very expensive. You have to play back from one. Anyway, I found out because I decided to do hologram, and that was when I realized why probably people don't do it anymore. You know. And today when we look for holographic image, you get this top hit, you know, of all this kind of like things like this. You know, it doesn't even hold image anymore. You know, this is hologram. It doesn't even have a photo on it. It's not when you look for photography, you see things, right? You see a photo, it's the content is there. But you know, this medium is no longer used to hold things, you know, almost. It's even broken down to sprinkles, you know. It doesn't even hold 3D image even, you know. So for me, I sort of also saw that there are people actually using holography in works in Australia. So when I was on residency, you know,
I can see it slightly, but it's very.
This is the hologram that I saw of Margaret Benion's work in Australia. So there were other examples of it here. I show a few more.
And then I found that
project, you know, the one that you talk about, the legend of the
yes, the legend. So I can also go. So anyway, maybe I'll skip forward to that. Yeah. So I guess the whole, I'm gonna skip this because it takes very long. But basically, what I ended up making, right, is this hologram. They were actually 3D rendered scenes, and I worked with a lab in Lithuania to actually produce them. They printed it in a very special way. They produce this print actually that is not just a print, but that the image exists on a plane, holographic plane behind the image plane. So what you see is actually in the image plane behind the image is in the holographic plane. So that, you know, when you see it, it's kind of a work that depends on where you stand, that the work is completely different. And I think with that, you know, thinking of works that almost can't be photographed, or let me skip this one. I'm going to talk about the works also that are almost like wormholes to alternate realities. So I think the most recent thing I'm working on is thinking also maybe because limitations of not being able to build physical work at this point, being at home a lot and having a small baby attached to me, thinking about other ways of producing work. I also looked back at all the work and thinking, of how do you translate it to something digital if you're presenting it. We in Singapore, I think in the arts, there was this lot of talk of how to make the work digital, digitizing everything. But of course, I feel it's a process that you yourself as the artist need to translate it. And it's not just like I made it into digital form, but actually the whole process of translating is quite complex actually. And it may even come out as something different. So most recently I ended up working on the legend, which is not like the legend of Debbie, but actually like a map legend of Debbie. So this is the map legend of Debbie. I mentioned all the works that I had done as a bit like these wormholes, like micro worlds. They were sort of like portals to other things, and to make it literal in the game. So to use the game engine to produce like a whole world, where there was this gigantic gallery, and when you like touch the work, you fell into this other universe, like a black hole, or sort of a surreal sort of world that represented another way of trying to represent the work that I had made in the past. My dream maps as these kind of abstracted legends of themselves, and even kind of things that imagine things in the works I might make in the future. Maybe they look a bit like more future-y like this, or using different kind of materials as well, using scans. I also I also ended up also working on another project. This one's a void, which is going to be shown in a week's time. This is scans, badly made scans, it was made very hastily, of void decks, but you don't know this void decks in the beginning. It just looks like voids, a big ruin in the distance, but it turns out that this is something very familiar. It's a part of the Singapore landscape for me anyway. Is the void decks I wait between when I shuttle between my house and my parents' house with my baby, So these are the a little boat, you sail in the night, and then you navigate through these ruins of these voids. And so thinking of other ways of these are almost like making a whole world in itself. And I think for me, that's trying to translate them into the visual, in this way. It's something I over the years, I guess, have been moving towards as well. And I think also it's I mean, for me, it's been a struggle to also translate it into the visual, thinking of the final form. And I think the obviously the game format offers a lot of opportunity for explaining a narrative in a very different way. So maybe I want to wrap up so we can do a bit of Q&A, right? Yes. This is the last bit. Okay, so this is the where to find the Debbie works in the next during Singapore Art Week. So I have about 4 works on show. One is all these are quite I would say they are like film works. They are like gameplay videos. They are like gameplays. Because I've been working a lot more digital things. So I think it's interesting to see. I don't know where everything is going in the world, but these are this is a summary where you can find the other works to see in person.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you. Appreciate your sharing. Wow, that was a lot to take in.
I lost my notes. How do I
go through the journey from the beginning, 10 years ago, and then to what you're exploring right now?
So a shout out to Debbie and also everybody else on Facebook and YouTube, and together with us on Zoom. Please use the chat function. You can use it and comment. We will answer. Debbie will answer. So while the participants do have some questions, I think, I'm not sure. We do encourage them to feedback and all that. But one of while we chat about these different states, I would even say, of perception. Not even just different perception, but even state it's quite different. It translates from the digital to the analog, and then what have you, which is iterations of 3D. You seem to be interested in perceptions, and before I say fiction of knowledge, but even the fiction of perceptions, you like to play with this line. Would you like to have while our participants think of their questions, but would you like to have a comment? I'll start off with fictions of perception, an artist.
For me, as someone who works as an artist, but also as having worked also as a commercial designer, the way I
Yes.
normally explain the difference between what I do as a designer, a commercial designer, and what I do as an artist is that normally in design you're like, well, there is a gap between what people think it is and what it actually is, what they're able to perceive and what the thing is, what the thing really is. The palimpsest of it is often there's this gap that can never be that we're trying to say, well, we're bridging it now, we're bridging all this misunderstanding and all this gap. But as an artist, is opposite of what the designer is saying. You can say this is it. In fact, maybe it's even more terrible than it is. It's even further from we're even further from understanding it. So for me, that's what the two halves of what I do as both as interaction designer and as artist. The difference. So I guess the perception of it, is and sometimes also people are maybe simple creatures in the sense that if people want to believe a thing is that. People want to believe.
I'm going to quote, people want to believe the thing is that. Whatever that
is that. They want, people also, even like, you got chatbots. Even if you're talking to a machine, sometimes people want to believe this is a real thing you're talking to, a real person. So that's what we want. We always assume people, or even that everything, we want to know that all knowledge can be known, that we can figure out everything, that all the dots will be connected in history, that humanity will know everything, but actually we can't. So there's often times also people, maybe there is no intention to communicate even, they're across the ages. So there will always be this void, or the fictional knowledge, I suppose, is that, when I stand from a high point and I see the whole city, I'm like, wow, I know the whole city now, but I don't. It's a totally different thing from being on the ground, and seeing all being mixed up, all the things on the ground, all the complications, of small things, on the ground.
Well.
So,
Avik has some questions.
Yes.
So, Avik is interested in sound as well, but I'm going to latch on to Avik's question, whatever it is. Can you all hear us? Is it hearable? So Avik is interested in sound, and I'm just wondering, in Pulau Saigon, Debbie, there are physical things that have been left behind, and this is for the sound designers in the room right now. Then how do you leave behind sounds? What is the like what is it? Are they instruments and all that? Do they have anything left over?
Everything left over.
But I'm gonna I can answer Avik's question first. I'm just gonna piggyback on him.
We need to read the questions.
I'm gonna read the questions
on YouTube,
Facebook. Yeah, I'm gonna read the question for people on YouTube, on Facebook. So, first thing first. Avik asked, you mentioned there were a lot of challenges, issues, as you translated to a digital realm. Could you please elaborate more, Debbie? Did your work change significantly? Did you create something different than in the process of translation? Okay, part 1. Part 2, seems like the primary distribution of work is through videos created by screen capture. However, do you intend to let people play the game, so to speak? Okay, that's...
I think the first question on whether the work changed significantly, yes, it did. In fact, I don't know whether I would consider them the final form. In fact, I feel like I'm only at the beginning of making works into games, because I a lot of the thing changes. I thought I was going to make this space. It turned out totally different, in translation. It is definitely not the same thing anymore. I don't know if it's the purest form of the work even. But challenges. There are also technical challenges. I'm a one-woman developer team, so I do all the thing myself. I do all the 3D myself. I do all the coding myself. So it is in fact, maybe when I began making work, I was not so techie in that sense. Over the years, I picked up more skills like 3D modeling, doing coding with also doing with Unity. So these are things also I picked up over the years, so that I could make the things I want to make. Also because they are useful skills in a commercial sense as well. But of course, it is I think the challenge is also a technical one. So sometimes I see sometimes I do see more like developers who are very technically proficient, but maybe they for me, right, I have a lot of I have a lot of content maybe in my head, and trying to find the form for it in that medium is the difficult part. Also, I do want to make them into playable games, but of course, thinking about distribution is probably a part I haven't figured out as much yet. For the works I've built this period, I hope to put them on maybe itch.io so that people can play them. Yeah. I don't know whether I'm at the stage of doing a more proper, distribution on Steam, but eventually, hopefully, move towards that. since that's probably what I hope for as well. Yeah.
So, a next question from Amiru. He says, Debbie, it's really cool how you have translated your work into gameplay. So what were the challenges you faced in the process of creating? Did you have to attempt to master softwares? Example, Blender.
Yes, actually, I actually did this thing where some years back, I said to myself that I will do one Blender file every day. Doesn't matter what.
Wow.
Yeah.
So intense.
So I will just Google some random image. Okay, I found an image of a fish tank. I will make a fish tank today. So I tried doing that. I think I have a blog somewhere with that. One Blender 365 3D. I think I called it. So that's how I ended up learning Blender over the time. I think I've reached this stage where now hopefully I could say I will make one Unity room, one tiny room a day, maybe. But obviously I also have a full-time job. I also have a baby, so it's very hard to do that. But in my mind, that's what I imagine that in terms of building skills, I think technically speaking, if I don't know how to make it that way, right? I don't know how to 3D model, I don't know how to do the coding myself. I can't really control the medium as much.
Yeah,
so when you work with this area, this kind of stuff, I think you need to be quite hands-on. It's a bit like if I were a painter, which I'm not, I would probably need to know how paint works, how pigment works, how color works a lot more. To do that, you need to really get into the material. So I think this is the same version of it. Yeah. So yes, it did take years. I wasn't very good at 3D in the beginning either. So I had to start from somewhere.
And we have a good question from Sandy here. Sandy Tan says, so Debbie, how do you develop confidence to work with different technological devices or materials? And how has this changed over time and after developing several projects? So did your...
Wow. That's interesting. So for me, right, I try to document everything I do. I mean, it sometimes it's a bit, one can feel a bit vulnerable putting it out there. But I tried, I like this idea of once you publish it, you almost commit to having to do the thing, So I tell everybody, I'm going to do this thing. Wow, I'm going to do it. And then you have to do it. Because if you don't do it, then you tell everybody you're going to do it already. Then you cannot back out now. You cannot back out anymore. So one way is like, obviously tell everybody I'm going to do this ridiculous thing. And then I have to do it already, And I also kept notes. So I think maybe I share my screen a little bit as well.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah.
So some years back, about 10 years, no more than 10 years ago, I created my own wiki. So I guess this is Media Wiki. You can download the software that Wikipedia runs on. And I just kept notes on all the things that I was doing. So if let's say, like for example, I click on the Unity, if when I study the Unity, I keep the notes of everything I do, So all the things I do can be found, It's like, what did I do? What code snippet did I have? I can find it back and then I can read the thing, So these for me, right, putting it all together on my own really helped actually, because I also write it out on my blog. I did something so that even though I'm not an expert in it, I think there's something to approaching as a keen amateur is that spirit. Like I won't be embarrassed if my thing is terrible. I just try it first. And trying different even digital mediums is for me, and then some of the things don't work out. A lot of the experiments don't work out in the end. It's okay, but the one or two times, I find something that really works for me, then I use it more. Yeah.
I want to comment first on what you've just said, which is it's okay I put it out there first. Sometimes it doesn't look so good. I am committed to putting it out there.
Yes.
I think that's very, very good spirit lah. And also I would like to say that even our participants, they committed to the ArtsXplore. I think some of them are thinking, alamak, I have to do something now. I have to collab. I have to collab, I have to collaborate with people. I have to think about sharing it with people right now in this point of time. I'm sharing also with friends to keep each other, and the community accountable. Like how Debbie, I now that I realize, Debbie, that you're actually using me as a sometimes accountability where you go, oh, I'm having this exhibition. The moment you voice it, right? You have to do it, right? Because Serena Pang is definitely going to ask me to come, and then we're like, okay, by the way, I did go and see your exhibition.
Yeah, we did. We saw
at
the
NGS.
one at NGS.
So that's the way of keeping, accountability, and also the way you said, like, you have you actually have all this research, and a lot of our participants actually have strong social issues, and they're trying to get their research doing, and then they have that same issue as you, which is I have all this research, how do I translate it to a form? Because they don't identify themselves as, I'm a professional artist, I'm definitely an artist, this is the path I'm going to take. A lot of us actually don't identify with it, but we actually want to creatively express it, you see. So I guess, you also can relate to that lah. So we have a question now from Tahira. So it says, Debbie, how do you as an artist navigate the challenges of translation from specifically your first conception of the work to obtaining the materials, that's the second part, and then presenting them in an artistic form using these limited nature of the objects? Your objects are very broken. You don't work with whole objects. Debbie, you always use fragments, things very
and then you sort of piece them together. Assemblage.
So how do you have that process? Can you break it down for Tahira who's asking? Because we also have all these, a lot of our participants have all these little fragments of things.
Ideas.
For a lot of the archive sort of works that I was making, a lot of the time, I think of them, it's very funny because in the beginning, I thought of them as pretty neutral. I was the neutral party. I'm a neutral party. I was like, I called myself the Singapore Psychographical Society, and I thought I was very neutral in like presenting the thing. Of course not. I realized that people were seeing other things in it. They realized that it's like, as an artist, the stamp of the Debbie was on it, the way I had done it. So actually, in the way, even in this, like, even as like a collection, right? Even the way the collection is arranged is already part of the artistic process. Even that is part of it as well. I think I normally experiment. I would say I experiment the form of how I want to show the work. In fact, for me, it is maybe not even it's probably time that limits the how many iterations I make. Like people have asked me, when is the work actually completed? For me, it is sometimes the works can take me several years to build, like many years to build actually. So and the collection may continue and it's hard to define that point for me also. But normally I reach one when it's so too vast almost that I feel like actually I meant to only make like small data. Like these collections are small. We talk about big data, and big data holds the key to everything. But of course, there's also a thing about these archives that are a bit problematic. That have all this kind of very subjective material in it. Where the interpretation is open. Maybe that for me is very interesting. Like I had the opportunity to work with the Substation on their archive show, their 25th anniversary archive show, and they gave me this pile of like paper, like a whole storeroom full of paper that was like completely disorganized. There was no order. I think that's when you saw me there, Spang and Lee.
Yes, you complained the same complaint about the same thing.
We saw you in the room
with paper.
The room was so chaotic, and it was, you had to do it as a labor of love. So figuring out this archive of Singapore art, Singapore performance art, and so a lot of it was like I also worried that whether I represented that history correctly a lot at that point, because some of the material is historical material in a way, it's still material that is fact, that it was real stuff, so but of course how I came to terms with it is also that this was an artistic approach into an archive. So I understood that it would have this. The point is to have the interpretation, to be not. It did not have to be fact. It did not have to be the exact history. It's not a memory project, not a Singapore memory project. Tell me the real things. Exactly. it needs that room to explore, to imagine, you know. So that was the value I brought to it.
Yeah, I mean also bringing it back to the myself and as an artist and the participants is that we also have our STEM in our works, but then how do we actually portray certain issues that we are passionate about into that artwork, and how do we, you know, right or wrong, you know, accurately, you know, like portray certain things, you know. But I feel that as long as we try our best, right, and acknowledge that there is sometimes a translation
incompleteness.
Yeah, incompleteness or
I would say
translation.
there's always this sense of incompleteness, and then as artists very often we have this tendency to want to maybe I'm just speaking for myself or us, we have this tendency to want to make it into this perfect object.
That's you, Lei.
That's just
you
me.
always want
That's
to make
just
it
me. Okay,
perfect.
I don't speak for everyone.
Yeah.
But I think learning to accept that there's incompleteness, there's still gaps while you're still working on it, and then you have a timeline that I'm supposed to show next week, and then you just have to stick to that timeline and put it out there.
So it's like a shout out to like Debbie's, like Lei always has this like perennial sadness that she always feels she's presenting incomplete or less than perfect work. But I mean, listening from Debbie's, like, you know, she's like, I never present perfect works. I always present incomplete fragments of works.
It's always in fragments.
It's always in fragments.
In this state of,
so maybe our participants also can understand, you know, that as long as we try to put something out there, you know, and that's important, because people have to see, you see. At least see, without Debbie, I would not have gotten to know Jennifer Berry and Mr. Lian Huat, right? Mr. Lo Lian Huat, right? And I've never heard of this thing called, until I've seen her previous exhibitions, called Pulau Saigon.
Pulau Saigon.
Yeah. So that is the thing, you see. That's the whole thing. Yeah. So, well, any more questions, people?
Yeah. Any more questions? Anyone like?
Okay. That's a good wrap up.
Yeah, I think we're good. If there's no other questions from the participants, maybe we give a round of applause to Debbie.
Thank you, people.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, people. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you to all the participants who are here with us today.
Yeah. Shout out to all the participants and thank you so much.
Yes.
This will be, you know, some things like, you know, we're happening things
this next week
as well.
2:00.
Other artists, you know. Thanks so much I hope you all, you know, gain from Debbie's talk, Debbie's explorations, and also our questions. I think the important part is questioning. You know, questioning now is part of the way we grow together and move together. I feel, you know, as part of the whole thing.
And shout out to Debbie again. So if you want to see her work, go to SAW and go to her website. Website is dbbd.sg. So visit Debbie's website. You can find out where we're showing for the Singapore Art Week.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, people.
Thank you.
Yay. Thanks, Tahira. Thanks for the shout out. Thanks, participants. Thanks for everything.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Maybe we can